Paul Rodgers, the voice behind timeless bands like Free, Bad Company, The Firm, and even Queen, has long been regarded as a giant in rock history, known for his smoky, bluesy tone, his raw power, and his distinctive live presence. Paul Rodgers has, for many years now, been referred to simply as The Voice, Egg the Voice, by his fans and by fellow musicians alike, and his ability to convey melody and emotion has transcended human reality. But behind the glamour, behind the soaring choruses, the loud applause, and the movie star life, is a far more personal and painful story than most fans have ever imagined. Certainly, Paul Rodgers' life was not just made of platinum records, fame, and sold-out stadiums. No, the real story of Paul Rodgers is a story of quiet determination, a story punctuated by early tragedy, personal heartbreak, artistic solitude, and near-death experiences that almost robbed rock music of one of destined greatest voices for eternity. Born in the working-class town of Middlesbrough, England, Paul Rodgers was raised in a working-class family that was more grit than glamorous. His father was a truck driver, a stoic man, and tragedy would come early, when he died during Paul's teenage years. The tragedy had hit young Rodgers at some instinctual form of instinctual level, and that sparked something that would never truly go out. Within music, he had found not expression, but escape. He wasn't just singing, he was bleeding, looking for light in the dark. That emotional spawning ground would leave its mark on Paul as he progressed, at first with his teenage band, the Roadrunners, then gradually with his fast success with Free. At age 18, he was co-writer of the universally recognized rock anthem, All Right Now, a track so big it would eventually be both a curse and a blessing. Into consideration, how he must have been feeling. Personally, he was silently guarded and unloading, a supposed happiness that was never going to dissipate, that success was no industrial fire, relief law Paul, was going through the motions. But beyond that scene, the dream was coming apart. Free wasn't as free as it could have been, and there was bumper-to-bumper tension. Much of it because of the extremely talented but extremely troubled guitarist Paul Kassoff. Kassoff's descent into heroin addiction brought the trajectory of the band to a halt and fractured it at the seams, leaving Rodgers, still in his teens, in the sad place of watching a friend and band member self-destruct in slow motion. No amount of hits could heal that which was breaking inside. The band attempted several comebacks, but each time proved to be precisely that, a brief comeback. Ultimately, in 1976, the inevitable happened when Kassoff died of a heart attack at just 25 years old and after his body had been devastated by a crazed heroin addiction. The loss was devastating for Rodgers, who rarely speaks of it. The grief was with Rodgers like a scar, silent, permanent, and untold. Even as he emerged anew as the frontman of Bad Company and went on to form one of the most commercially successful rock acts of the 70s, there was still a part of Rodgers who was emotionally and physically separated from the saturation of the fame craziness. While his bandmates were thumping it up the hard-partying rock star lifestyle, Paul stayed estranged, not only due to personal discipline, but also by the haunting ghosts of his past. He had gained fame, deepening his persona with hits like Feel Like I, Mac, and Love and Shooting Star, and gained household acclaim. However, he wore a smile on stage and was a man still tormented by loss. Many friends of Rodgers claim he was an introspective person, somewhat solitary at times, and considered himself comfortable behind a guitar, and not at the after-party. Rodgers spoke about fame in interviews as if fame were a shadow that captivated while at a distance, but was ultimately empty when you got close to it. It was Rodgers' emotional depth and sense of tragic awareness that gave his voice weight. One does not just hear Paul Rodgers. You felt Paul Rodgers. As time passes by, the music industry shifted. Bad company eventually slowed to a crawl for Rodgers, and Rodgers took on new outlets for creativity. He started the firm with Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page and sported the near-impossible task of fronting Queen after the tragic loss of Freddie Mercury. I am sure for most artists this would have been the pinnacle of their career. For Rodgers, however, it was complicated. Although Rodgers gave exhilarating performances and did great justice to Mercury's memory from the start, he faced constant criticism from rabid Queen fans. Surely the comparisons were constant, the expectations brutal. Rodgers was never intending to replace Freddie. He simply wanted to keep the music alive. But this backlash took a toll with emotional scars. Years later, he would admit that he let the negativity affect him more than he cared to admit. It felt as if, regardless of how high he flew, the shadows of doubt, both internal and external, still followed. And then came the darkest chapter yet. In 2016, Paul Rodgers suffered a series of strokes, 2 minor, 1 major, which almost ended everything. In one moment, Rodgers was rehearsing. The next, he was unable to speak. For a man whose identity was wrapped up in his voice, the trauma was unimaginable. His world was made silent. And in that unsettling silence, Rodgers was battling a new and existential threat, not just of losing his career, but losing himself. He had to keep this in private for years, and even after the harrowing rehabilitation away from the spotlight, he managed to learn to talk again. Then painstakingly, he learned to sing again. Not until 2023 that he showed how close he came to losing everything that he managed to gain back, let alone get back to live performance, is nothing less than miraculous. But there is no mistake the battle left marks. Paul Rodgers not only survived the music business, or that he survived this life's most cruel turns. He buried his father and his best friend. He survived public vilification and private health battles. His story is one of survival that has forged scars in silence. He is misunderstood, often seen as aloof or too serious. The reality is that he just has carried a greater burden than most will know. Passion aside for the moment, his voice might be ageless, but the man has for sure known pain, guilt, isolation, and rebirth, in ways that record sales and ticket stubs don't really let you measure. Sure, when we hear Paul Rodgers, we hear talent. But when we hear Paul Rodgers, we hear a monument to emotional endurance. The tragedy of Paul Rodgers is not just the loss he suffered, but how few people recognized the losses as he suffered. We heard the songs, but did we ever truly hear the man? Now, in a world where rock legends are often mythologized as gods, Paul Rodgers stands out as something rarer and far more powerful, a human being, flesh and blood, wounded but unbroken. He didn't seek to dominate the spotlight, only ever sought to serve the music. And perhaps that's what has made his voice so unforgettable. It was never about the fame. It was always about the feeling. Rodgers poured his entire self into his craft. He filled our radios and our arenas with heartache and hope, with an honesty few dared to share. He didn't need sequined costumes or stage antics. All he ever needed was a microphone and a heart full of stories. And now, as he gets his voice back after almost losing it forever, those stories will mean so much more. Rodgers' story serves as a reminder that behind every iconic rock vocalist is a real human being, ultimately trying to navigate the loss, betrayal, illness, and uncertainty. It's easy to romanticize someone like Paul Rodgers and to elevate them to almost mythical status. But what makes Paul Rodgers really legendary is not that he knows how to sing. It is that he knows how to make art even when everything has gone to hell around him. His story isn't just a story about rock and roll. It is a roadmap for survival. An industry that drinks and breathes life out of artists have countless bodies scattered everywhere, and somehow he survived, not simply because of talent, but character. His suffering didn't make him bitter, it made him wise. It made his art deeper. It gave the quality of his voice, a kind of soul that can't be engineered or replicated. And that's why today, even